Elena Watkins stood in the gleaming lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel, her reflection bouncing off the marble floor as she adjusted her navy blazer. At 52, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent decades in the political arena. As the former Attorney General of the state and a respected legal mind, Elena was accustomed to commanding attention when she walked into a room. Today was supposed to be routine, a speaking engagement at the National Prosecutors Conference, something she had done countless times before. The conference organizers had booked her the presidential suite as a courtesy, a small token of appreciation for her last-minute agreement to fill in for the governor, who had canceled due to a family emergency. "Good afternoon, Ms. Watkins," the receptionist greeted her with practiced warmth. "We're delighted to have you staying with us." "Thank you," Elena replied, sliding her ID across the counter. "I believe I'm in the presidential suite?" The young receptionist's fingers danced across the keyboard, her professional smile never wavering. Then a small crease formed between her eyebrows. She typed something else, frowned slightly, and picked up a phone, speaking in hushed tones. Elena checked her watch. She had exactly 90 minutes before she needed to be downstairs for the welcome reception. Just enough time to freshen up and review her notes one last time. "I'm so sorry. Ms. Watkins," the receptionist said, replacing the receiver. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding with your reservation." Elena raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding?" "Yes, the presidential suite is currently occupied." The receptionist's voice dropped to a near whisper. "By Congressman Reynolds and his delegation. Richard Reynolds." Elena felt a twist in her stomach. Of all the politicians to cross paths with today, it had to be him. Her former protege turned rival, who had orchestrated a smear campaign against her during her last run for governor. Their bitter public feud had made headlines for weeks. "I see," Elena said, keeping her voice level. "And what arrangements have been made instead?" "We've upgraded you to our executive suite on the 14th floor. It has an excellent view of the city, and—" "That will be fine," Elena interrupted, not interested in hearing about the amenities. What she wanted was distance from Reynolds and whoever his delegation might be. Rumors of his extramarital affairs were common knowledge in political circles, though nothing had ever been proven. The receptionist handed her a key card with visible relief. "Thomas will assist you with your luggage." Elena nodded her thanks and followed the bellhop to the elevator. As the doors were about to close, a hand shot between them, forcing them open again. "Hold the elevator, please." Elena suppressed a groan as Congressman Richard Reynolds stepped in, followed by a young woman she didn't recognize. He was shorter than Elena remembered. With a receding hairline he tried to disguise with an elaborate comb-over. His suit was expensive but fit poorly around his expanding waistline. "Elena Watkins," he said, his surprise quickly masked by a politician's smile. "What a pleasant surprise." "Richard," she acknowledged coldly. An uncomfortable silence filled the elevator as it began its ascent. Elena fixed her gaze on the changing floor numbers, acutely aware of the young woman stealing curious glances at her. "Are you here for the prosecutor's conference?" Reynolds asked, attempting small talk. "I'm the keynote speaker," Elena replied without looking at him. "Ah, stepping back into the spotlight? I thought you disappeared from public life after your unfortunate campaign." The elevator chimed as they reached the 7th floor, Reynolds's floor, thankfully. "It was lovely catching up," he said with fake sincerity, holding the door open. "Miranda, after you." The young woman, Miranda, stepped out first, but Reynolds lingered. "You know, Elena, I always admired your resilience. Not everyone could show their face after such a humiliating defeat." Before Elena could respond, he was gone, the doors closing on his smug smile. She leaned back against the elevator wall, taking deep breaths. 7 years since their falling out, and he still knew exactly how to get under her skin. The elevator continued upward, and Elena tried to push thoughts of Reynolds aside. She had more important things to focus on, like her speech. When she reached her room, Elena tipped the bellhop and locked the door behind him. The executive suite was spacious and well-appointed, but her mind was elsewhere. She unpacked methodically, hanging her clothes in the closet and arranging her toiletries in the bathroom. As she was setting up her laptop on the desk, her phone rang. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize. Elena Watkins speaking. "Ms. Watkins, this is Miranda Chen," a hesitant voice said. "We just met in the elevator?" Elena frowned. "How did you get my number?" I work for the conference organizers, Miranda explained quickly. I'm not actually with Congressman Reynolds. I was just delivering some materials to him. I see, Elena said, still suspicious. What can I do for you, Ms. Chen? I need to speak with you. It's about Reynolds and the president. Elena's interest was piqued despite her better judgment. Go on, not over the phone. Can we meet? The hotel bar in 20 minutes. After a moment's consideration, Elena agreed. Curiosity had always been her weakness, and despite her distaste for gossip, anything involving Reynolds and the president was worth at least hearing out. The hotel bar was dimly lit and relatively empty at this hour. Elena spotted Miranda immediately, sitting alone in a corner booth, nervously shredding a cocktail napkin. She looked younger up close, probably in her mid-20s, with intelligent eyes that darted around the room. Thank you for meeting me, Miranda said as Elena slid into the booth across from her. Make it quick. I have a speech to prepare. Miranda leaned forward. I'm not just a conference organizer. I work for the Inspector General's office. We've been investigating financial irregularities in government contracts awarded to companies with ties to Reynolds. And this concerns me because the trail leads back to your time as Attorney General. Specifically to cases you handed off to Reynolds when he was your deputy. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. I ran a clean office. We know you did, Miranda assured her. That's why I'm coming to you. We believe Reynolds buried evidence in at least 3 major cases. Evidence that would have implicated several companies owned by donors to the president's first campaign. A waiter approached, and both women fell silent until he had taken their orders and left. What exactly are you suggesting? Elena asked, keeping her voice low. We think Reynolds made deals. He selectively prosecuted smaller companies while letting the big donors walk. And now he's being rewarded with government contracts worth millions. Elena shook her head. You need more than suspicions to make accusations like that. We have more, Miranda said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. This contains financial records showing payments from shell companies to Reynolds' private consulting firm. The same firm that now employs 2 of the president's former aides. Elena stared at the thumb drive but didn't touch it. If what you're saying is true, why come to me? Why not go to the press? Because we need someone with credibility to make this public. Someone who understands the legal implications and can't be easily dismissed as having a political agenda. Miranda paused. Someone like the former Attorney General who once supervised Reynolds. He'll say I'm bitter about my failed campaign. That this is personal. It is personal, Miranda countered. He betrayed your trust. He corrupted cases you built, and now he's about to be nominated as the new Attorney General. Elena's head snapped up. What? It hasn't been announced yet, but our sources confirm the president will name him next week. Reynolds in charge of the Justice Department, can you imagine what he'd do with that power? The waiter returned with their drinks, and Elena took a long sip of her scotch, trying to process this information. The idea of Reynolds as Attorney General was disturbing on multiple levels. What exactly do you want from me? Elena finally asked. Review the evidence. If you find it compelling, speak out. Use your keynote address tomorrow to raise questions about Reynolds' record. Create enough public doubt to force a more thorough vetting process. You're asking me to blow up my career and reputation based on evidence I haven't even reviewed yet. Miranda nodded solemnly. I know it's a lot to ask, but if not you, then who? Elena picked up the thumb drive, weighing it in her palm. I'll look at it. That's all I can promise for now. That's all I'm asking, Miranda said, visibly relieved. As they finished their drinks, Elena noticed a commotion near the entrance of the bar. Reynolds had arrived with 3 other men, all laughing loudly as they made their way to a table. We should leave separately, Elena said quietly. He can't see us together. Miranda nodded, sliding out of the booth. I'll go first. There's a back exit through the kitchen. After Miranda left, Elena waited a few minutes, keeping her back to Reynolds' table. When she finally stood up, she had the misfortune of turning directly into a waiter carrying a tray of drinks that were now soaking the front of her blazer and blouse. I'm so sorry, ma'am, the mortified waiter exclaimed, trying unsuccessfully to dab at her clothes with a napkin. The commotion drew attention from throughout the bar, including from Reynolds' table. Elena could hear his distinctive laugh even before she looked up and saw him watching her with undisguised amusement. Back in her room, Elena peeled off her soaked blazer and blouse, hanging them in the bathroom to dry. She changed into the hotel's plush robe and sat at the desk, turning the thumb drive over in her hands. 20 years in politics had taught her to be cautious. This could be legitimate evidence of corruption, or it could be a trap designed to make her look foolish. Miranda seemed sincere, but Elena had been fooled before, by Reynolds himself. She plugged the drive into her laptop and clicked on the first file, a spreadsheet showing payments from various companies to RR Consulting. The amounts were substantial, ranging from $50,000 to $2 million. The dates corresponded with major government contract awards. The next file contained scanned copies of emails between Reynolds and various business executives. They were carefully worded, but the implications were clear. Following our discussion, I'm confident our proposal will receive favorable consideration, one CEO had written. Reynolds' reply, happy to provide insight into the process. Looking forward to our dinner next month. Elena opened document after document, her frown deepening. Bank statements showed Reynolds' firm growing from a modest operation to a multi-million-dollar enterprise in just 3 years. There were photographs of Reynolds golfing with executives from companies he had declined to prosecute. Most damning of all, there was a memo written in Reynolds' own hand, outlining which cases could be deprioritized due to resource constraints. It was nearly midnight when Elena finally leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. The evidence was compelling but not conclusive. She could raise questions, certainly, but without more direct proof of quid pro quo, Reynolds could dismiss it as circumstantial. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miranda. Have you reviewed the files? We need to talk. Breakfast, 7 a.m., hotel restaurant. Elena sent back a simple okay and closed her laptop. She needed sleep, but her mind was racing. If Reynolds became Attorney General with these skeletons in his closet, he would be compromised, vulnerable to pressure from the very people he was meant to hold accountable. She finally drifted off around 2, only to be jolted awake at 6 by her alarm. After a quick shower, she dressed in her backup suit, charcoal gray instead of navy, and headed downstairs. The restaurant was nearly empty at this hour. Miranda sat at a corner table, looking as though she hadn't slept at all. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and she jumped slightly when Elena approached. You look nervous, Elena observed, sliding into the seat across from her. I have reason to be, Miranda replied quietly. Reynolds knows something's up. He's been making calls all night. How do you know that? We have his room monitored. Miranda must have seen Elena's shocked expression because she quickly added, with proper authorization, this investigation has been going on for months. A waiter approached to take their orders. Elena asked for black coffee and toast while Miranda ordered nothing. I reviewed the files, Elena said once they were alone again. It's troubling, but it's not a smoking gun. There's more, Miranda said. After we spoke yesterday, I received this. She slid her phone across the table. Elena looked at the screen. It was a photograph of Miranda and herself in the bar, deep in conversation. Who sent this? Elena asked sharply. Anonymous number, followed by a message. Back off or everyone gets burned. This changes things, Elena said, pushing the phone back to Miranda. They're watching us. Have you told your superiors? Miranda shook her head. My direct supervisor is on vacation, and his boss is friendly with Reynolds. I don't know who I can trust. So you're freelancing, Elena concluded, her respect for the young investigator rising. That's gutsy but dangerous. I didn't have a choice, Miranda insisted. The nomination announcement is scheduled for Monday. Once it's official, the media will focus on his qualifications, his voting record, his public persona. This evidence will get buried in the noise. Elena's coffee arrived and she took a slow sip, considering her options. Her keynote speech was at 10 o'clock, 3 hours from now. She had prepared remarks on the importance of prosecutorial ethics, the very topic Reynolds had apparently trampled. What if I told you there might be stronger evidence? Elena asked carefully. Miranda leaned forward. What do you mean? When I was Attorney General, I kept my own records, notes on every major case, including those I assigned to deputies. I didn't trust my memory, so I documented everything, including conversations, decisions, and my reasons for them. Those records could establish what Reynolds was supposed to do versus what he actually did, Miranda realized. Excitement creeping into her voice. Exactly. But they're not here. They're in a secure storage facility back home. We don't have time to retrieve them before your speech. Elena nodded. I know, which means I have a decision to make. Do I use this platform to raise questions I can't fully substantiate yet? Or do I stick to my prepared remarks and fight this battle later, with complete evidence? If you wait, it might be too late, Miranda warned. If I speak now without bulletproof evidence, Reynolds will paint me as a bitter, failed politician seeking revenge. I'll lose credibility, and so will your investigation. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud greeting. There she is, our distinguished keynote speaker. They looked up to see Reynolds approaching with the conference organizer, a tall man with a perpetual smile named Paul Bennett. Ms. Watkins, I hope you're ready for your big moment, Bennett said cheerfully. We have a packed house this morning. I'm looking forward to it, Elena replied smoothly. Reynolds' eyes darted between Elena and Miranda, his smile never reaching his eyes. I see you've met my research assistant, Ms. Chen. She's been helping me prepare for the Judiciary Committee hearings next week. Miranda paled slightly but maintained her composure. Congressman Reynolds has been very busy. Lots of preparation needed. Indeed, Reynolds said, his gaze locked on Elena. Big announcements coming soon. Career-defining opportunities. Congratulations in advance, Elena said coolly. I'm sure you've earned whatever's coming to you. The double meaning wasn't lost on Reynolds, whose smile faltered momentarily. Well, we should let you finish your breakfast. Paul, shall we check on the audiovisual setup? After they left, Miranda exhaled shakily. He knows. He's sending a message. Then we need to send one back, Elena said, a plan forming in her mind. Here's what we're going to do. 2 hours later, Elena stood in the wings of the hotel's grand ballroom, listening as Bennett introduced her with a list of accomplishments from her career. The room was filled with prosecutors, judges, and legal experts from across the country. In the front row, Reynolds sat with several members of the conference board, looking perfectly at ease. Miranda had left to make arrangements according to Elena's instructions. It was a gamble, but sometimes in politics, the appearance of having damning evidence was almost as powerful as actually having it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former Attorney General Elena Watkins. Applause filled the room as Elena walked to the podium, her expression serious but confident. She placed her prepared speech on the lectern, then looked out at the audience. Thank you for that kind introduction, she began. We gather at a critical moment for our justice system. Public trust in our institutions is at an historic low. Citizens question whether there are two systems of justice, one for the wealthy and connected, and another for everyone else, she paused, making eye contact with several people around the room before her gaze settled on Reynolds. As prosecutors, we take an oath to uphold the law without fear or favor. But what happens when that oath is broken? What happens when cases are selected not based on evidence but on political connections? What happens when the very people tasked with fighting corruption become corrupted themselves? A murmur ran through the audience. This was not the generic speech on ethics they had expected. During my tenure as Attorney General, I prioritized cases based on evidence and harm to the public. I expected my deputies to do the same. I have recently become aware that this standard may not have been upheld in all instances. Reynolds shifted in his seat, his casual demeanor replaced with rigid attention. I have been presented with evidence suggesting that certain cases involving politically connected defendants were deliberately deprioritized. Evidence suggesting that after leaving public service, those responsible for these decisions received lucrative contracts from the very entities they had declined to prosecute. The murmuring grew louder. Reynolds leaned over to whisper something to the person beside him. I take these allegations seriously, as should anyone committed to the rule of law. That's why I've instructed my attorney to prepare a comprehensive file containing this evidence, along with my contemporaneous notes on these cases. Should anything happen to me or to those who brought this information forward, this file will be released to every major news outlet and the appropriate congressional committees. Gasps and whispers erupted throughout the ballroom. Reynolds' face had turned an alarming shade of red. The applause was scattered and uncertain as Elena stepped away from the podium. Some audience members sat in stunned silence, while others whispered urgently to their neighbors. In the front row, Reynolds' face had turned a dangerous shade of red as he spoke into his phone, eyes locked on Elena with unmistakable fury. Elena didn't wait for questions. She gave a curt nod to the audience and walked briskly off stage, her heart hammering in her chest. She had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would either expose Reynolds or destroy what remained of her own credibility. There would be no middle ground now. Ms. Watkins, a conference organizer, hurried toward her, clipboard in hand. The press is asking for statements. We've set up a room for interviews and— No interviews. Elena cut him off, continuing her purposeful stride down the hallway. I've said what I needed to say. She heard the commotion building behind her as she pushed through a door marked Staff Only. The service corridor was empty and dimly lit, perfect for a quick escape. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Need to meet now. Hotel service entrance. Miranda's text couldn't have come at a better time. Elena could hear voices in the main hallway growing louder, no doubt Reynolds and his entourage looking for her. She quickened her pace, taking a left at an intersection where a faded sign pointed toward the loading dock. Ms. Watkins, the conference organizer, had followed her, jogging to catch up. Please, you can't leave yet. There are protocols. Tell Bennett I'll call him later, Elena said without slowing down. But Congressman Reynolds is demanding. I'm sure he is. Elena reached a heavy metal door and pushed it open, emerging into the bright sunlight of the hotel's rear parking area. The sudden transition from the dim corridor momentarily blinded her, and she raised a hand to shield her eyes. Elena, another voice called, Miranda's voice. She stood next to a nondescript sedan, driver's door already open. Hurry! Behind her, the door banged open again. Bennett had caught up, and behind him was Reynolds, his face flushed with anger. Two other men in dark suits, security or staff, Elena couldn't tell, flanked him. Watkins. Reynolds shouted. You can't just drop a bomb like that and walk away. Elena slid into Miranda's car, slamming the door as Miranda gunned the engine. Through the window, she saw Reynolds pointing at them, shouting something to his men. One of them was already on his phone. They're calling security, Miranda said, backing out quickly. Or worse. The car lurched forward, tires squealing as they accelerated toward the exit. In the rearview mirror, Elena watched Reynolds growing smaller, still gesturing angrily. That was quite an exit, Miranda said, hands gripping the wheel tightly as she navigated through downtown traffic. Almost as dramatic as your speech. It wasn't supposed to go that way, Elena admitted, her professional composure finally cracking now that they were alone. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline began to ebb. I planned to be more measured, raise questions rather than make outright accusations. What changed? I saw Reynolds sitting there, so smug, so certain of his untouchability. Elena looked out the window at the passing city. And I thought about all those cases that should have gone forward, all those people who deserved justice but never got it because Reynolds decided his career was more important. Miranda glanced at her. You realize what you've done, right? There's no going back now. Reynolds will deny everything, paint you as bitter and desperate. Let him try. Elena checked her phone, which was already filling with notifications. Reporters, colleagues, even old friends were messaging, calling, demanding to know what evidence she had. The truth has a way of coming out. Speaking of evidence, Miranda said, taking a sharp turn onto a residential street, we need to secure what we have and figure out our next move. Reynolds is powerful, but he's not stupid. He'll be working to contain this, destroy anything that could corroborate your claims. Elena nodded, a sudden wave of exhaustion washing over her. The weight of what she had just done was beginning to sink in. She had just publicly accused a congressman, soon to be Attorney General, of corruption, with evidence that was compelling but not conclusive. Where are we going? She asked, noticing they were heading away from the downtown area. Somewhere safe, Miranda replied. Somewhere Reynolds and his people won't think to look for us while we figure out our next move. They drove in silence for several minutes, both lost in thought. Elena replayed her speech in her mind, wondering if she had gone too far, too fast. The look on Reynolds' face told her she had struck a nerve. But had she also pushed him into a corner where he would fight even more viciously? Do you regret it? Miranda asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. What you said up there. Elena considered the question carefully. Her legal career, her reputation, possibly even her safety were now at risk. But she thought of the evidence on that thumb drive, of the cases Reynolds had buried, of the justice denied to make way for political ambition. No, she said finally, her voice finding its strength again. I don't regret it. Someone had to say it, Miranda smiled slightly. Good, because we're just getting started. As they turned onto a tree-lined street of modest homes, Elena's phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized, David Chen, her former chief of staff. She stared at it for a moment, surprised. They hadn't spoken since he had abandoned her campaign years ago. "Are you going to answer that?" Miranda asked. Elena took a deep breath and pressed the green button. "Hello, David, it's been a while." "Elena," his voice was tense, urgent. "I just saw your speech online. What the hell are you doing?" "The right thing, finally." "You have no idea what you're up against," he said. "Reynolds isn't just some corrupt politician. He's connected, protected." "So you know," Elena said. It wasn't a question, a pause on the line. "Yes, I know. I've seen things since I started working for Phillips. Things that made me realize why you were so adamant about some of those cases." "Then help us," Elena said, looking over at Miranda, who was listening intently as she drove. "We have some evidence, but we need more. We need access to my old files." Another long pause. "You kept records?" "Of course I did. You don't spend 20 years in law without learning to document everything." David sighed heavily. "This is bigger than you think, Elena. The president is already involved. They're scrambling at the White House, trying to get ahead of this before it explodes." Elena felt a chill. She had expected Reynolds to react, but direct White House involvement suggested connections even deeper than she had imagined. "All the more reason to bring it to light," she insisted. "It's dangerous," David warned. "These people play for keeps. They don't just ruin careers, they ruin lives." Miranda pulled into the driveway of a modest bungalow and cut the engine. She gave Elena a questioning look, pointing at the phone. "Can we trust him?" she mouthed silently. Elena considered the question. David had abandoned her once before when things got difficult. But he had also been her most trusted advisor for years before that. "I need to know whose side you're on, David," she said into the phone. Another heavy sigh. "Meet me tonight. The old fishing pier, 9 o'clock. We'll talk then." The line went dead before she could respond. "Well?" Miranda asked. "He wants to meet tonight," Elena replied, staring at the phone. "He knows something about all this. Something that scares him. Can we trust him?" Elena looked at the small house where they would hide for the next few hours, planning their next move in a battle that had suddenly become much larger and more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. "I don't know," she admitted, "but right now we don't have many allies to choose from." As they got out of the car, Elena glanced up and down the quiet street, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. Somewhere across town, Reynolds would be rallying his forces, making calls, preparing his counterattack. The next 24 hours would determine whether her bold stand would expose corruption at the highest levels of government or destroy what remained of her career and reputation. Either way, there was no going back now. Darkness had fallen by the time Elena and Miranda drove toward the old fishing pier. A half-moon hung low in the sky, casting just enough light to illuminate the weathered wooden structure stretching out over the black water. The place was deserted, exactly as David had predicted. "This doesn't feel right," Miranda said, scanning the empty parking area. "It's too isolated." "That's the point," Elena replied, though she couldn't quite shake her own uneasiness. "David and I used to come here during my campaign when we needed to think without distractions. No one ever found us here." They parked Miranda's car behind a stand of trees, partially hidden from the main road. Elena checked her watch, 8:55 p.m. They were early. "We should stick together," Miranda insisted as they got out of the car. Elena nodded. "Let's walk the pier first, make sure no one's waiting for us." The old wooden boards creaked beneath their feet as they made their way across the pier. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet night. The gentle lapping of water against the pilings, the distant hoot of an owl, their own cautious footsteps. At the end of the pier stood a single bench weathered by years of rain and sun, facing out toward the lake. "It's clear," Miranda said after they'd checked the entire length of the pier. "We should wait here where we can see him coming." They sat on the bench, both too tense for conversation. Elena stared out at the rippling surface of the lake, memories flooding back of late-night strategy sessions with David during her campaign for governor. He had been her rock then, brilliant, dedicated, tireless in his efforts to get her elected. "Tell me about David," Miranda said, breaking the silence. "Can we trust him?" Elena sighed. 7 years ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. He was the best political mind I'd ever worked with and a true friend. After I lost the election, She trailed off. What happened? 2 weeks after the results, he took a job with my opponent's team. No warning, no explanation, just a brief email saying he'd gotten an offer he couldn't refuse. The betrayal still stung even after all this time. I called him, left messages. He never responded. Miranda frowned. And now he suddenly wants to help? That's what we're here to find out, Elena said as headlights appeared on the road leading to the pier. A car pulled into the small parking area, an unremarkable sedan with rental car plates. The headlights went dark and a lone figure emerged, walking slowly toward the pier. That's him, Elena whispered, standing up. As David approached, his features became clearer in the moonlight. He looked older than Elena remembered, with gray streaking his dark hair and deep lines around his eyes. He wore a baseball cap pulled low and a jacket zipped to his chin despite the mild evening. "You shouldn't have come back, Elena," he said by way of greeting, his voice carrying across the wooden planks. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest." "Hello to you too, David," she replied, trying to mask her nervousness with sarcasm. He glanced at Miranda. "Who's she?" "Miranda Chen, Inspector General's office," Miranda introduced herself, extending a hand that David ignored. "You're the one who started all this," he said, his tone accusatory. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Tried to expose corruption at the highest levels of government?" Miranda suggested, unfazed by his hostility. David laughed bitterly. "You've poked a hornet's nest and now we're all going to get stung. That's why we need those files," Elena cut in. "They're our only protection." David remained standing, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes constantly scanning the area around them. "The files aren't at the storage facility anymore. I moved them this morning." "What?" Elena stood up, alarmed. "Where?" "Somewhere safe. For now." David finally sat on the bench, but at the far end, keeping distance between them. "After your speech, I knew they'd come looking. I barely got there in time." "In time before what?" Miranda asked, her professional skepticism evident. "Before Reynolds' people. A private security team showed up at the facility 20 minutes after I left, with a court order authorizing them to seize all materials related to the cases you mentioned in your speech." A chill ran down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the night breeze coming off the lake. "How did they get a court order that quickly?" "The judge who signed? It is an old friend of the president's, the same judge who dismissed 3 lawsuits against companies owned by the president's donors, cases that Reynolds was supposed to prosecute but didn't." Miranda leaned forward, suddenly intense. "So it's all connected." "It's worse than you think," David said, lowering his voice as if afraid of being overheard despite their isolation. "Remember Thomas Wilson?" Elena nodded. "Of course. He was lead counsel on the Fibertech case, one of the ones Reynolds buried. He was found dead in his apartment this afternoon." "Apparent suicide. What?" Elena felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "That's impossible. I just got an email from him 2 days ago. He was planning his daughter's wedding." David's face was grim in the moonlight. "The official story is that he was under investigation for evidence tampering and killed himself rather than face charges." "The real story? He contacted the Justice Department last week, said he had evidence that the Fibertech case was deliberately tanked on orders from above." Miranda's face had gone pale. "You think they had him killed?" David shrugged, but the gesture was anything but casual. "I think people who stand in the way of powerful interests tend to have accidents or sudden health issues, or decide to kill themselves for no apparent reason." The implications hung heavy in the night air. Elena had known politics was dirty, but murder? That was crossing a line she hadn't believed Reynolds capable of. "We need to take this to the press," she insisted. "With what evidence?" David countered. "The files alone aren't enough. We need someone who was directly involved to corroborate." "What about Wilson's evidence? Whatever he was going to give the Justice Department?" David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This was in a package that arrived at my office this morning. No return address, but the handwriting on the label was Tom's. I think he made copies just in case." He handed the drive to Elena, who stared at it like it might explode. "Have you looked at what's on it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No. The fewer fingerprints on this, the better. But whatever it is, Tom thought it was worth protecting. Worth dying for." Elena thought but didn't say. The lake water lapped gently against the pilings below, a peaceful sound at odds with the growing sense of danger surrounding them. "So what's the plan?" Miranda asked, breaking the tense silence. We can't hide forever. David leaned forward, keeping his voice low. I have a contact at the Washington Post. Someone I trust completely. We take the files and this drive to her, let her break the story. And then what? Elena asked. Then we go to the Senate Judiciary Committee. They have to investigate before they can confirm Reynolds as Attorney General. If even half of what we suspect is true, his nomination is dead. Unless the president withdraws it first. To avoid the scandal, Miranda pointed out. Either way, Reynolds doesn't get the job, Elena said firmly, and the companies that bought his protection get exposed. David nodded in agreement. But we have to move fast. The confirmation hearings are scheduled to start in 3 days. Where are the files now? Elena asked, glancing around as if expecting them to materialize. In the trunk of my car. David produced a set of keys. I've booked 3 rooms at a motel about 2 hours from here under different names. We'll stay there tonight, then drive to Washington in the morning. Miranda looked skeptical. Your car might be recognized. It's a rental paid for with cash. David stood up, scanning the darkness around them once more. We should go. I don't like being out in the open like this. As they walked back along the pier, Elena noticed David constantly looking over his shoulder. The campaign strategist she had known was always cautious but never fearful. Tonight he seemed genuinely frightened. You're taking a big risk helping us, she said quietly, falling into step beside him. Why? Last I heard you were working for Governor Phillips, Reynolds' biggest supporter. David stopped walking, turning to face her fully for the first time. In the moonlight, she could see the genuine regret in his eyes. I made a mistake, Elena. After your campaign, I was angry, bitter. I blamed you for the loss when I should have blamed myself too. Phillips offered me a chance to stay relevant, and I took it. And now? Now I've spent 7 years watching good people compromise their principles for power. I've helped them craft messages to hide their true intentions. I've seen how the system really works, who gets protected and who gets sacrificed. He shook his head wearily. I'm tired of being part of the problem. The simple honesty in his voice convinced Elena more than any evidence could have. This was the David she had known, the man of principle who had been her closest ally for so many years. They reached the end of the pier where the weathered boards met the shore. David's rental car was parked in the shadows of some trees nearby. My car is about half a mile down the road, Miranda said. We should follow you to the motel.